Well, you bring up a very good point. You say, this was obviously just unbridled power with no check. And we saw this, I say this in all earnest, and some people don't like it, but the greatest single blunder, and I argue if you have something you'd like to challenge it with or something you think is a greater single blunder that any president has made in the last 50 years was Donald Trump signing the COVID emergency decree. Now, you could argue he didn't have all the facts or he shouldn't have, but had he known what he knows now, but he did sign it. And that literally allowed for every state governor, mayor to become essentially dictators overnight for years on end, where they could just issue mandates and close stuff. So my question is, how do there's been no remorse. How do we fight this emergency power reform? Is this something that all 50 states have to fight? Is there a separate one we can fight at the federal? In other words, shouldn't there be like a 7-day, say, declaration where you can have unbridled power by the executive in an alleged emergency, but then have immediate call of legislators to meet, and so your actual people can vote, like your representatives can vote on whether to continue this state of emergency? What's the story with that? Don't we, in other words, what kind of emergency power reform does America need that was essentially, we could see all the flaws after COVID?
Yeah, I think an example that you bring up is a great way to formulate that, but it does have to happen on the state level. I mean, we do have a Federal Emergencies Act that, yeah, there is a federal emergencies law that, the states can get money if the federal government has an emergency out there for it. But it really has to follow the state declaration because the states have the police powers. So it has to happen in every state. And that's why we pursued that, we pursued a 50 state scorecard based on emergency powers at Maine Policy to try to figure out what the differences were between the different states. And yeah, we were talking about that. Why shouldn't there be a standard process? If the governor believes there's emergency, why shouldn't she approach the legislature every week or two? If we're in an emergency, it means it's
fire unless they can vote. Go ahead. Sorry.
Right. I mean, if you're in an emergency, it sort of assumes that it's an urgent, imminent threat happening at the moment. It's sort of self-explanatory in a way. An emergency should be obvious. And so I didn't think it was so unreasonable to say, hey, how about every couple of weeks or a month even come back? We were in a 15-month state of emergency where the governor just decided the terms, when it starts, when it ends. And you'd be surprised. There's a lot of states that are like that.
Well, what kind of effort is there? Is there an organization? Is your organization, does anyone actually have like a template for all 50 states to introduce these and have them passed? Have any states, I believe Florida has done, I think even Pennsylvania may have done some reforms, but I haven't kept track. But are there any states that are leading the way, like say, hey, this will not happen again, we've reformed state law?
Yeah, I think Pennsylvania did a good job. And the funny thing about that was it had to happen through a ballot initiative because the legislature, the governor had vetoed it. And so in order to override the governor's veto of a sensible emergency powers reform, similar to what you suggest, I can't remember the details of it, but that was the best one that I had seen in terms of reforms happening over the pandemic. And it's right. It's require the governor to come back to the legislature every 2 weeks, every few weeks, and present their case and make sure that there is an emergency. And then the legislature gets to decide whether that's true or not via 2/3 vote. If there's an emergency, it should be obvious. You should be able to get 2/3 of the legislature to vote to continue those powers. If not, let's go back to normal governance, where the legislative branch governs the lawmaking and not the executive branch. And it was just this tendency to turn our whole constitutional system on its head, which was really, really bothersome for us.